All right, the last item on the agenda is to discuss the Cyanobacteria Advisory Warning. And I've been thinking about kind of what would be the best process. I'm going to ask that we first have Warren Muir speak. Then I'm going to hand it over to Becky, and she, I think, has some staff members here, Dave Ford and Christine. Then I thought we would go, and as board members, I would go, then Dave Senecal, Dave Bowers, Brad, and Paul. And then if the board is agreed, we'll open up to the public for any comments or questions they may have. And then at the end, the board can try to decide what our next steps are. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Mr. Muir, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm Warren Muir. I'm a scientist. I'm a volunteer with the Lake Winnipesaukee Association doing water sampling, and I'm also a volunteer in US EPA's cyanoscope program. So I have a microscope and equipment to look for cyanobacteria. But most importantly, I've been a resident in our home in Winter Harbor for over 65 years. My parents built a home, and I've been there as a child and now full-time as an adult. I'm going to try and make my remarks short. It's late in the day. I'll make a variety of statements. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm happy to provide any backup for any statements that I'm making. The meeting is long, and I'd like to be able to move forward. And I'm not doing a great big PowerPoint. This is just for some pictures. Over the last 65 years, my family has observed a significant deterioration in the water quality in Winter Harbor. And while I'm speaking about Winter Harbor, I'm sure that what I'm talking about is not unique to Winter Harbor, although we certainly have some special situations going on there. Our family, when we arrived, we had a beach, broad expanses of clean sand out to rocks that we could swim out to and stand on. And since then, there's been a growth of vegetation that has invaded the sands. Fortunately, not of milfoil or invasives, but of native plants. We see the rocks now covered by slimy algal biofilms. It's very slippery that did not exist. And we've seen large amounts of algae growing in the water. And I'll just show you what this might look like. Okay. Wait a second. I have to turn it on. All right. Okay. This was taken this past week. You'll see this great big glob of algae there. Right along our beach. You can see more to the right. And then I took this 2 days later off of our dock. This gooey algal growth growing on the bottom of what was our sandy shoreline. And then what has gotten people more focused on these issues is that recently we've had the first reported cyanobacteria bloom in our area in Winter Harbor, and I'll show you what that looks like. I'm sorry. I wanted to say that this algae doesn't grow just in the summer. It also grows year-round, and so this is just as the ice is going out in April. You'll see algae there as well. So it's not just a summer phenomenon. Okay, now to cyanobloom. On the 29th of August, if you look very carefully, you'll see lots of little dots in the water there. They're hard to see, but that's what it looks like. they're not so much on the surface, they're in the top 6 inches to a foot. And there's just all these little dots there that in the springtime you would have assumed were pollen. And that's what it looked like on the 29th. We took a net and scooped some of this up from off the, just walked along the dock, picked it up and put some of this in a jar, and this is what was in the jar. Okay, that's the same day, from the same waters, it looks like there are a lot of individual cyanobacteria cells. However, each of those dots represents about 5,000 cells. So they're colonies of cyanobacteria cells. And this particular type of there are a wide variety of cyanobacteria. A number of them put out toxins. This is gliotrichia, and it happens to be associated with toxins as well. There's not great understanding as to exactly when the cyanobacteria will release their toxins, although if people were to take this and try and kill the cyanobacteria and boil it, they would release all the toxins into the water, and the toxins are not alive but are poisons. And so this was reported then to the New Hampshire DES, and the next day they issued an advisory for our end of Winter Harbor. We looked around, and it was certainly all through our neighborhood. Didn't get a chance at the end of the day to explore the rest of the harbor. So they issued an advisory on the 30th of August, and that advisory is still in effect, advising people to stay, to not have contact with the water. I provided a water sample for them to test for the toxin. I provided one also as part of the water sampling to the UNH, so they could perhaps get their lab to look for the toxin, and I have no results back from them as yet to report. So the advisory was issued on the 30th, but over the next week, there was some ebbing and flowing. I mean, you can just look and see this stuff out there from your boat or from your dock, but it ebbed and flowed. But on September 5th, from our perspective, it clearly peaked. And so this is looking down from our dock the next week. What were dots, in the bottom foot, a whole bunch of them had come up to the top, and it started aggregating and agglomerating. And so they were, it was a 10 or 100-fold increase over the amount that prompted the advisory. And this is another view, again, from our dock, just looking from a different, so there's no question. Now, a couple of days after this, my wife and I went around in the boat, and we went up Nary Shore and saw the glio there, up by Port Valen, saw it there. I sampled the deepest part of Winter Harbor for the Association for UNH. It was present there. Went across Wyandotte Shore, it was present there. Went down to the closest buoy right by Kerry Beach, and it was present there. And I mentioned our home in Winter Harbor is the first development just north of Kerry Beach. The closed end of Winter Harbor. So my interpretation is, well, certainly there was bloom all over the Wolfeboro end of the harbor, even a couple of days later, even though it started dropping off at this point. The bloom always was worst in our area, but it wasn't good, it wasn't good elsewhere there. And the way the prevailing winds are, I cannot account for the bloom there being blown or somehow from where we are. So there clearly are sources there as well. So that's the cyanobacteria bloom. Now, the algae, the slime, the vegetation, the cyanobacteria, the key driver for all of those is the phosphorus in the lake, okay? And so increases in phosphorus going into the lake are the key to the degradation that we've been observing over the decades. On the other hand, the phosphorus levels in the water column, are not that high. In fact, the samples that we get, UNH's analyses and so forth, at all of these sites are nowhere near the levels where the lake would be degraded. The key is the phosphorus in the sediments. Often this is called a clean water cyanobacteria because its life cycle is it lives in the sediments most of the year, collects its phosphorus from the sediments, and when it's sunny and the waters are hot, they will float up to the surface, grab their nitrogen from the air, and multiply. And the algae we got is algae growing on the bottom of the lake, and the slime the biofilm is growing on the bottom. I think all of these are being driven by phosphorus in the sediments of the lake, and are associated, therefore, with phosphorus-laden runoff going to the lake along our shorelines. I think that's the key. If we get to a point where the phosphorus in the water column is driving deterioration in our lakes, we have lost our major opportunity to prevent and reverse the problem. So we've got to deal with this while it's a shoreline sediment problem and not a polluted lake-wide problem. In order to deal with this, in my view, is that we really need, as a priority, a community-wide effort to stop the flow of phosphorus-containing sediments into our lakes and to ensure that people can enjoy the waters safely. And it's going to require participation by a broad range of participants, including the town, the state, private property owners, relevant businesses, nonprofits like the lake associations, the media, and others. It's got to be a broad-based, multi-participant thing. And the type of activities need to fall into three categories. One is monitoring and analysis. Another is information sharing. And the third is mitigation, to directly deal with the flow of waters containing sediments and phosphorus getting into the sediments. And the town has a strong stake in the success of these efforts and has important roles in all of these categories. And I'm not going to go through and articulate all the different ways the town has roles and can play, but I will cite two examples. And one example is the prime example that our neighbors are concerned about, and that is our area is fed by three or more, but there's three major streams that are not spring-fed streams, they're stormwater streams that are feeding into the lake and carrying sediment. And one of the major sources are coming from the development up the hill, Cricket Hill and up Forest Road, and are being collected and directed down the hill through town culverts, washing out our land, pouring across our land, and pouring into the lake with phosphorus from up above. We've raised this issue for a number of years with the town, and the Public Works Department recognizes the problem and the needs, and recognizes the need to deal with this runoff, and has had an engineering firm develop plans, and has got plans for 3 best management practices, which will address 3 of the sources in our area that are feeding down where this bloom occurred. But to date, the implementation of these plans has not been funded, and so there are plans, but no action and nothing else related to it. So we think that Wolfeboro needs to allocate the resources to address the water that it is pouring down down upon us and into the lake. And it also needs to participate in the watershed management planning that will identify other sources to Winter Harbor and to other shores. So there's a mitigation role, and that's but one example. The second is the town has really an important role in information dissemination. And this recent cyanobacteria bloom, I think, is a pretty good example of that. It was reported, what are you supposed to do if you see a bloom? You're supposed to call the number at the state, call the number of the state, they do their thing, and then I actually provided it to Dave Ford because I had talked to him 2 days before to see where things stood, but it didn't flow everywhere. It didn't flow to responsible town officials. It ended up, on page 8 in the obituaries after the worst of the bloom was passed in the Grunter. The people were swimming at Kerry Beach and all through and using the waters of the harbor who just didn't know about this. And so what really is needed is to develop some clear and well-known communications protocols. Who's to do what? What are different people's responsibilities, so that the key individuals and the key institutions are informed, and so they can use their networks to inform others, so that everybody who needs to be informed can be informed quickly about what's going on and what they should do and shouldn't do. So information is important, but information also is important on things like fertilizer use and phosphorus management and the types of topics that have been taken up at the Water Summit and some of the other public meetings. So there's an information sharing. So a community-wide effort to tackle water quality issues may sound daunting and very costly. But first I'll say our lakes are our treasure. They're the reason why so many of us are here. They're the foundation of our local economy, and the people here care. And there are plenty of individuals and institutions who are willing to work together to try and deal with this problem. So I think it's doable. We've let the water quality of the lakes, not just Winter Harbor, but all of our lakes in the town, deteriorate, and they'll continue to get worse if we don't act. On the other hand, if we do, we can not only prevent further degradation, we can significantly improve the water quality of the lakes. And so I urge the town to think about the various ways in which it can participate and help collaborate with a bunch of willing individuals and institutions to try and tackle this so that my grandchildren will have in the future what my parents provided me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or if others, I think, would like to comment. So-
I will go through the list. Is there a direct question for Mr. Muir? Dave, do you have?
Yes. Town of Tufton, Merrill Lake in particular, over the last 5 years,
Yep,
have had some significant
Improve-
algae blooms.
yep,
I mean, to the point where you could go down Lang Pond Road and see it out there, hundreds of feet, just green from shore to
Yep.
shore. Now,
and I understand that some of the actions that have been taken have made it better now.
Yes.
correct, they
So
didn't
it's
have
a-
any this summer at all,
So, right, so,
that I'm aware of. I usually check with Jack Parsons, who watches that for them. And you are probably aware that Merrill Lake does dump into Winter Harbor.
yeah,
There is a dam up on the, way up in the harbor, in Tufton. It
Yep.
comes out by the church and down into Winter Harbor. And I'll let my colleague here talk to that, because we were out there today in a boat, and we went all around those areas and went to some other areas as well. But that area where it dumps in is pretty significant as far as algae growth, plant growth, and you can see it right from where it comes out, where it goes right and left along the shoreline and out substantially.
yeah,
And we also checked the depth of the water in all those different places. So I'm assuming that some of that could be coming from up in that area even. And then, of course, you got the main lake that comes right into Winter Harbor.
well,
As far as movement of this into the shallow water. But you said you took some samples out in the middle of Winter Harbor at the
yes,
bottom?
yeah, that's right. If you take a look at the water column,
Right.
and I've taken it in the deepest part of Winter Harbor, right in the center,
About 60
and taken it at 4 other locations, off of Port Valen, off of Nary, off of Whitegate, and right by Kerry Beach. And the phosphorus in the water is not high. Okay, and so it's not the water; it's what's in the sediment. That's the key. So the sediment isn't coming from the basin down to our end of the harbor in any significant way.
I mean,
I'm
I don't
convinced.
understand how it moves, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We
I mean,
could certainly-
some of this gliobacteria, I mean, it's floating, and so it could do that. But we didn't have any. We had calm waters. I mean, it was just sort of trapped down where it was.
We could certainly tell which lawns had phosphorus on them and which ones didn't.
Yeah.
It was pretty clear.
Yeah.
And
You mean from looking at the lawns?
from going up and down the shoreline.
Yeah, right.
You know, but the majority of the places we saw anyway were a lot of natural vegetation, compared to the number of lawns.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Yeah. But where, for example, in our area, where the runoff's coming from is the development up Forest Road, and there's half a mile and a mile above us, and it's just coming on down from there. So it's not all local lawns.
Right, but I'm just saying, most people would think that.
Yeah, many people would, and if people are putting fertilizer on their lawns on the shoreline, first of all, it's illegal, and second of all, that can be a problem. And that needs to be part of the solution as well. If anybody has a failing septic system, we need to deal with that too. But
I think that most people don't understand how this happens. They just think somebody's putting fertilizer on the lawn, it's getting in the lake, or they have a failed septic.
yeah,
That's putting the nutrients in.
Yeah.
And that isn't true.
yeah. See, the nutrient that moves more readily from a septic system is nitrogen. The phosphorus tends to stay associated with the sediment. So unless it's failed such that you're getting a whole flow with sediment and so forth, you're not getting a lot from septic.
Well, we have seen them.
Well, yeah, and there certainly are examples, but I don't believe that accounts for what we've seen over the decades.
Yeah, exactly. This is a decades problem.
That's right. That's right.
It's not new. This is not new.
No, no, it's not new. It's not new.
Okay, what I'd like to do now is you're going to stay around. We're going to have
I will
some
stay
more,
around. I'll be
more
available.
conversation. I'm going to pass it over to Becky, and you have Dave and Christine here, because I think, one, we need to have Dave talk about what the town has done, and you referred to some watershed studies, and also what information the town was given on the advisory warning, or exactly what the state did do. Becky?
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple of remarks.
Sure,
if that's
absolutely.
appropriate.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for all of this information. As a new person who's originally from the mountains, I probably know a little more about mountains than lakes, so it's nice to get educated on what's going on here. That said, I can say that I took a law program in Vermont where we studied environmental law, and so this is really important to me, really fundamental. Then the health of our pets and our people is what government does. We protect that, and so that's very important as well. If we have any kind of a direct discharge of stormwater to a water body, we need to set the example and correct that, because that is not appropriate, nor is it allowed, nor is it legal. You're right, lots of bad things travel in stormwater, along with the sediment, Coke bottles, coffee cups, styrofoam, pet waste, you name it. Lots of stuff that if it gets in the lake can create a bad situation. And so I would charge my staff to review what culverts are in that area, and to make sure that we're not directly discharging stormwater. If we are, we need to identify that and mitigate it. Couldn't agree more. So we initiated an after-action review of the protocols that we have in place when DES issues a warning or an advisory. We learned that at the initial outset, it was an advisory only, and we had staff checking to make sure that they didn't need to post any of the beaches for no swimming or any of that sort of information, and that was done immediately. So we had success there. We may have entered the page 8 obituaries later on down the line, and now we're going to put those actions, those protocols in place so that that doesn't take place again. And so I'd like to invite Mr. Ford to discuss what he knew and when. We'll have a little after-action review, and what Park and Recs knew and when. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I apologize for the just handing out the memo, but we were just working on it today, trying to get the latest information. And I don't know, again, the communications there, we think everyone's talked about that. I was hoping we could focus more on going forward, what we need to do going forward, but I would be more than happy to answer any specific questions if we had about the timeline we had. And again, luckily, Warren contacted me through the email, and we obviously passed it on to the town manager, who did get it to the selectmen. And again, Christine was involved also. So this is just the timeline, what happened.
I think the important part in your thing was that we did receive a call from New Hampshire DES that said we did not have to post Kerry Beach.
That's correct.
And I think that's important for the public to know, that that's what came to us. What I hear Mr. Muir saying, I don't understand why they didn't, but I think that's important, that we just didn't sit on our hands. And so I think that's important to kind of go over that.
Right. And I think going forward, I think what we need to do, and what we did too, is now we're on the list, so we will be notified right away with the notification. And I think based on this discussion, we could do additional notifications, and we did post it to our webpage, but there are more actions we could take, and I think this is why we're here to discuss.
that we're going to have multiple people notified moving forward. You know, what would have happened if Mr. Ford was on vacation that day? It would have sat in somebody's inbox until he returned. So moving forward, we want the emergency management director, health officer notified, myself notified, as well as the director of public works and park and rec.
So that's the, and then in terms of what happens in the past, again, I've been talking to Warren for probably before 2015, and we have taken some action, but I think the key now is what do we do going forward? I think that's what most people are interested in talking about. So I would go to the second page and talk about those issues, if that's okay, unless anyone has any particular questions about the first part of the memo. And what the first thing was that we are aware that Pat Topley with the Lake Winnipesaukee Association is in the process of just starting a watershed management plan for Winter Harbor. That is a project that Tufton Borough has raised money, and as we do share the bay, half of it's on their side, half is on our side. I was told that the plan will cover the parts in Wolfeboro, but only from the water quality and nutrient loading. They weren't planning on coming on the ground and getting more specific and detailed, which they will be doing in Tufton Borough. I said, is it too late for us to jump in? And she said, no, we could, because it's just starting now. It will extend into next year. So I've asked to be invited and be part of this, so we will be part of that in kind of program when they have their first meeting. And we're looking at potentially appropriating money in our 2019 budget, which I think could be in the $15,000 to $20,000 range, which would then, and I'm talking to their consultant is Geosyntex, so I've got an email into the engineer there and seeing how we could get ourselves involved. And that would get back into what Becky was talking about, specifically identifying where the sources of the problems are. And again, we've done that for Russ Pond, we've done it for Lake Winnipesaukee, Lake Wentworth, and now, again, we had talked about doing this a few years ago. We just wanted to do more action, so what we had done is appropriate money to actually do BMPs, and that money was supposed to be matched with a grant. Unfortunately, we didn't qualify for the grant. That's why the work that Warren had talked about was not done. But we have the plans, and that's one of the things that we looked at doing. Another thing, which I think was really a big thing, would be to propose a capital reserve account in 2019 with the idea that it would be a water resources management pool of money that we would put at the discretion of the selectmen to spend on specific things. And I've listed some of the things, which could be, for instance, funding for matching grants, like the 319 grants or a wetlands mitigation grant. Could be used for sampling and testing of surface waters. Right now we have volunteers doing a lot of that work, but when we have an issue like this, we could potentially fund more frequent testing because the state is limited on their resources. And if we want to be more proactive, we would have a source of money in case we had a problem in the future, we would have somebody to go to. We could use the money for studying the problem with regards to, with that watershed management plan. Do we want to further look at an area, for instance, do we want to look at putting sewers out here? We have not. The sewer system ends towards the end of Sewell Road. Do we want to extend sewers out to the Kerry Beach? Do we want to look at a more intensive type of septic system programs in that area? So those are areas that we could study and come up with alternative solutions. Another big thing, which Warren referred to, is public education. And that is something that we talk about, and we take it for granted that people understand this, but sometimes we're preaching to the choir. You know, it's the people that, but we need to get out to the whole public. So the idea of a public education program, maybe everyone within the watershed gets sent flyers and understands what the impacts are with regards to how they take care of their lawn and what they might dump down the drain. And then also funding BMPs, and this is what we had proposed, some minor things that individual property owners can do. And we've developed a whole set of these BMPs, and they are on our webpage now. They're on the Lake Wentworth Association, but again, we should probably publicize that more on how people can help within the watershed. Another potential would be potentially funding or helping support college interns in the study and the sampling program, so that luckily we have volunteers, but again, we need probably more people that could help out doing additional sampling and testing and fill out. So those are just some ideas, but I think we would look at putting that together and making sure that it's if the town supports it, with a significant amount of money, and I'm thinking, you know, maybe the $50,000 to $100,000 range, that we put that in each year, we would add to that, knowing that once we do the watershed management plan, we are going to find areas that need to have corrective actions, whether it's the parking lot at Kerry Beach, or whether it's the drainage that comes down Forest Road, the drainage from Partridge Drive. So a lot of these are in public right-of-ways, but a lot of them extend outside the right-of-ways, then go across private property, and then cross private roads like Whitegate Lane. And that's one of the issues we have identified, and we have projects. So the last thing we would propose to do is actually construct these BMPs and fund them in our budget. So we will propose these specific BMPs as a capital outlay project, or we can have discussion and include it within the warrant article if we decide to go that route. So those are some ideas I've thrown out there, and I'd be more than happy to discuss or ask questions.
Okay. We'll probably do general discussion about those as we go to work on our budget. I think those are some good possibilities for us to do, and we can look at defining the money that we're going to spend. Becky, do you have any other staff that you would like to speak?
Yes, I would like Park and Rec to speak to what they knew and when.
Christine Collins. I actually was out of the office when the phone call came in, but on August 30th, my admin assistant received a phone call from the state because we are part of the beach management program where they come and test our beaches, and then they bill us. They do 3 tests every time they come from 3 different parts of the beach, and then if it comes back not passing, they'll test it again, and they notify us. So we actually received a phone call, and they said, we wanted to let you know that nearby Winter Harbor, there was some algae over there. Typically, we're testing for E. coli. That's what they're testing for at the beaches. They said, we just wanted you to be aware. However, you do not need to post anything at your beach. So that's what we went with.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start, and we'll go down with the board to make some comments. I'm with you, Mr. Muir. Those lakes are our most valuable assets, and we need to protect them and keep them as pristine as we can. And we need, I agree, we need to address the nutrients that are in runoff, and I think that's an important. When I heard about this, I was on vacation. I came back to find out that there had been a cyanobacteria outbreak. So the first thing I need to do is figure out where. I'm a Lake Wentworth girl. I don't know much about Winter Harbor, and I want to thank Paul O'Brien for taking me in his car and kind of getting me to figure out where your house was. And he also sent me the Winnipesaukee Association newsletter that gave me more information about cyanobacteria. And then I went and I got this map, and I went and drove the area of the land above you, Jimney Lane, Berrywood, Maple, Partridge, and I drove down your road, and I could see those culverts going under your road. So then I had a pretty good idea of where some of the issues were. And I would like the town to spend some money on the drainage in that area in this next year. I think the town needs to develop some protocol, and I think I hear Becky saying that that's what we're planning to do. And I am glad that Mr. Ford has told us that they're going to work with the Winnipesaukee Lake Association. Kathy Barnard, who's here tonight, and I went in the spring to hear about the 2018 plan of the Winnipesaukee Association to do this watershed, realizing that that was an important part of our town, and that after they get done with your area, they're going to do Wolfeboro Bay, and I think that's important. The other thing that I have done, and I think this is what Dave was talking about, is the Wentworth Watershed Association has put on multiple, this is the second year, water summit I have gone to both of them. They were fantastic. We've got to get more information that came from those water summits. We had Dave Ford there, we had Matt Sullivan there, we had some of our engineers, we had the Winnipesaukee Association. But one of the things that I picked up was this Soak Up the Rain book that was there. And we may want to find out whether we can get sections of this out to the public. But it talks about rain gardens, and we have one down by the railroad station, vegetation swales, water bars, rain barrels. So it's a real good resource. And I agree with you. That's the other piece, is this education on what homeowners can do. So if we start working on our drainage, we start educating people and they start working on it. I'd like to be where you are, and we see a cleaner lake. There is still some slime on Wentworth on some of the rocks, and I think we've done a watershed plan there and are trying to do that. And I think that we need to spend as much time on the big lake, making sure we can see if we can get that happening. Dave Senecal, do you have anything more you want to say at this point? Nope. Okay. Dave Bowers, anything you want to add?
No, after getting Mr. Muir's information, I went on the internet and was reading about cyanobacteria, plus the handout, so I think I know much more than I ever knew. I live on Wolfeboro Neck, but I go by Cricket Hill and all the things up the Cricket Hill development by Bucky Melanson with 32 houses on it, and I go by that, and there are some little streams. There's one coming out by the Meter House. It used to be the Melansons behind it. Another one in Chipmunk Lane, and I watched these, but I don't know. I think everybody up there has town sewage. I don't think there's any leaking septic. No. I don't really know what to do about it. But I think something should be done. So, but we have attacked milfoil successfully, or we're still working on it.
Still working.
Right.
Work in progress.
I added that, and so this is another challenge. And I think, speaking of myself, I'll try to learn as much about it, and we'll support whatever Dave Ford and the town wants to do, along with advisors like Mr. Muir.
Brad?
Thanks. Yeah, there's a lot of us sitting here tonight. We've definitely gotten a very quick education on cyanobacteria here. Some of the notes I wrote down we've already talked about, and I think we definitely need to act as a town here on it moving forward. We have the BMPs, I understand it, are designed. We just haven't funded them yet and stuff, so I think we really need to, coming into our budget season, work on the funding aspect of those. Whether we can get grants or not get grants, I think we need to, pony up some money anyway as a town here. I think we had a good idea of the capital reserve accounts, to have them set up so ready for matching funds if they become available, or even to proceed ahead on our own if we need to start addressing these. We can't do them all at once, but we get a start on them and make some improvements. Another note I had down here, definitely we need to improve on, like we've already started on, is the notifications and education to the public on what this is. Because once we understand it better, we'll be able to treat it better, and the town will be better for it. So it's kind of what I've taken away from this, and the way I'd like to move forward with that is in those categories right there.
Paul?
Thanks. I've been a Kerry Beach person since I came here almost 10 years ago. And after Labor Day, on Labor Day actually, it was about 6 o'clock at night, 6:30 at night, and WMUR pulled up with a truck. And it was 10 minutes to 6 because they were going to do a live feed at 6 o'clock, but they couldn't get cell phone service, I remember that. And they were going to do a live feed about cyanobacteria in Winter Harbor. And my partner's granddaughter was there, and she just grabbed her and took her right out of the water. And it was kind of startling to think about that. Mr. Senecal and I hopped on the boat this morning, and we did a lap around the entire Winter Harbor. We went all the way down into Tuftonboro, and we kind of looked in everybody's windows, as you like to do when you're out there. And we're not educated eyes, but there are things that I saw and Dave saw in different places would leave no doubt that there's stuff growing in the water. I don't know whether it's cyanobacteria or vegetation. I just have no idea. We went up around Johnson's Cove, and I remember in the middle of the summer seeing colored stuff over there. It was pretty, purple and green and things of that nature. We saw pipes coming into the water. We saw culverts, where the water had eroded away the soil. We saw that. And then we went down into the Kerry Beach area, and we saw a lot of vegetation over by where people put the cairns. And there's a lot of stuff growing in the water. Again, I am not an expert. But I would say personally, it's clear to me that our community ought to be really concerned about what's going on around Winter Harbor, and I'm particularly in and around the Kerry Beach area. It's nice to know that Tuftonboro appears to be stepping up and wanting to do some things down at their end of the neighborhood. And I think it's really important that Wolfeboro join them. I think our Public Works Director, I spoke briefly with him yesterday, feels bad about this. And I told him he shouldn't. It's not one of those personal things, but we got to do something. Cyanobacteria, I don't know much about, but E. coli closed that beach on the July 4th weekend. E. coli comes from the intestines of animals and human beings. Enough said about that. So we got to figure out what to do, and I don't think we should overlook it or underfund it. In my view, when you have a problem, you hit it with a hammer, and you try to fix it. Clean water is what we promise people who come here. We promise them clean water, sunny weather, calm winds. Those are all the things we promise. And I'd say right now we're probably getting a C- on keeping the promise around the Winter Harbor area. And we should be keeping A's. We should be making A's. I agree with what everybody has said. I think we need to carefully but quickly assess the cause. We got to figure out what's going on, like do something, not permanently, but quickly figure out at least some initial causes. Number two, I think we need to educate everybody about what we find. I think it's useful to have protocols, and that's good, and that's, we'll do better at notifying people, but, the damage is done when you notify somebody. I think we need to let people know what we're finding. And I think we need to also make sure that we involve our budget committee in these conversations. It is important because at the end of the day, they're the last bite on the apple, and they got to get in the game, and we have to get them aware of and hopefully convinced of the fact that we need to do something. And then we need to see action in the form of some BMPs and whatever the things that Dave and other people can do that would deal with drainage and maybe sewer containment and other things that we just think might be going on down there. Because I don't know whether it's culverts only. There might be other stuff. I'm not smart enough to know. But I think Dave is, and I think our town is. I think the time and there hasn't been any duck and cover, but duck and cover conversations, it's just got to go away. Just get rid of them. And what we've done in the past is interesting to know about, but we got to look forward and focus on the things we face. We face an issue here, and I think, I'm not a scientist, but if you're right, and we get more phosphorus content in that water, we could be dealing with a much different conversation. And I don't think we should do that. So I think we need to focus on the things we face and deal with them as citizens of Wolfeboro. And so what I've heard around this table, my hand goes up in terms of what we need to do to fund it. Thank you.
Come on up. And then I'll open it up to anybody in the public.
I thank you and appreciate the reaction of everybody. I wanted to just share one additional thought, and that is, as a result of this experience, I've interacted with some people at the state. Now, the people I've interacted with are people who are knowledgeable and people of goodwill, but there's like one or two total, for the whole state dealing with everything. And so, when they're dealing with a situation like this, they're doing the best they can, but they don't have a way of collecting the information necessary to make an informed decision. And I think that some people in the town, your health official or some other people, ought to be trained enough to be able to recognize cyanobacteria. And the US EPA has given me a scope and charts and everything else, so that I'm happy to share it, or let anybody in any of the water associations or anybody in the town use this. So nobody told anybody that they needed to do anything by Kerry, but there wasn't a state official who went and looked. And so, we need to be in a situation where the town and all the responsible entities are adequately informed and can make reasonable decisions and move ahead. And as I said, I think there are lakes associations, Lake Wentworth Association, there are other entities and individuals and so forth who are happy to work together to tackle this problem. It's just too much of it's too important to all of us.
Yes,
Okay?
it is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody? Ann?
Ann Blodgett, President of the Wentworth Watershed Association. You've seen me before, you've heard me before, but I'm really pleased to support Dr. Muir and what he's doing, because what we have is a total wake-up call. I have attended speakers, Dr. Haney of UNH has talked about cyanobacteria for years. I've attended 2 of those, and I left each time saying, please, God, don't let it happen to us. Because aside from the huge public health issue, I mean, cyanobacteria in the toxic form kills small dogs, and it's known as a neurotoxin. This is what I hear. Aside from that, look at Merrill Lake. There was an economic impact to Merrill Lake. The property values declined. People couldn't sell their houses. They couldn't swim in their own lake. They paid taxes and couldn't swim in the lake in front of them. Businesses won't want to come here. Talk about economic development. It's the lake that brings people here. It's the spirit of Dr. Muir coming here all his summers and people coming here, and it's a really special place. We have to protect it. And it's not just, one part. It's each lake has this issue. We're testing for cyanobacteria in Lake Wentworth because it's there, it's coming. We go in partnership with the town of Wolfeboro, for those who don't know, on these 319 grants, and we put forth our funds to match those projects to protect the water. I agree that Winnipesaukee should be helped, but don't forget Wentworth. Please don't forget Wentworth. We are self-funding. We're a lot smaller. I can tell you right now that the people around Wentworth have learned that when something like milfoil comes up, that's an issue. People don't want to buy a property that has milfoil. There are many lakes. People in Massachusetts move up here because they don't like the lakes down there. That's Don Kretschmer's line. So I urge you to look at this from an economic, from a public health standpoint, and as a huge wake-up call, and support Dave Ford with many more resources so we can get, if we can get 319 grants, that we can get them, done. Because it's up to us. It's not up to the state. We can't wait for the state. It's up to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
Is there anybody else in the audience? Suzanne?
I think this has been very informative, interesting, and very well presented. I would just add one small item. It's kind of a trickle-down thing, no pun intended. I think that perhaps the town should have an in-house workshop with the planning board and zoning board and educate them about ways they can implement, when an applicant comes in before them, legally implement conditions upon their approvals by which these sorts of things don't contribute to further problems. I think that is an educational tool that should be used. It's probably at the lower part of the rung of the ladder, but it certainly should be included. Thank you.
Is there anybody else in the audience who would like to make any comment on this? Okay, board members, we want Becky and Dave to move forward and get us some more information on the 3 steps that Dave provided, and that is to work with the Lake Winnipesaukee Association Watershed Management Plan, to look at a capital reserve account in 2019, and to construct the best management along Partridge Lane and Forest Drive in 2019. Is that where this group would like to go, or do I have any other suggestions?
I think we gotta go in some direction, and it seems reasonable to me.
Okay, Brad?
I agree. I think, it's definitely a good start, knowing that it is just a start here too and stuff, because we need to really expand out. I mean, obviously we've got the problem there along, the Forest Road and Cricket Hill area, but you look at that whole end of Winter Harbor there, going all the way up toward, Port Wayland and those other developments there. They're all large hillsides with developments on them feeding down into Winter Harbor there, so.
I think we did Port Weldon, didn't we do some drainage? I drove that, and I thought I saw we did some drainage in some area down there, didn't we?
Yes, correct. All of Port Wetland and Winter Haven, we tried to implement BMPs by putting in under the drainage. We put perforated pipe with a stone so we can get these smaller storms to infiltrate into the ground. That all goes down to Earl Shores. We work with the property owners down there and improve that. So I think the initial reactions we're seeing is we're not seeing the peaks. We are knocking them down, so that's a good design. So we have incorporated that. And we are trying to do that with all our road upgrades. Unfortunately, some of these areas are private roads, or some of them, it's all the, like Warren was here before, all this other stuff, so then we've built upon them, and I think we've learned, so what Susan was saying is really good, that we want to have better land practices, so where Port Wetland was quarter-acre lots, and then Neary Shore was half-acre lots, and so we now have much stricter zoning and regulations, but we didn't do there, and we are continuing on that, and that's what we're proposing on Partridge. Partridge is not ready for the rebuild, but I think we can implement these BMPs, and I think that's what we're going to try for.
And
Thank you, Dave.
We also have some private, like Dave just mentioned, we have some private developments. They got going a little further. They got Osseo in there, which is a private development, which is fairly large in there too. Which maybe we should figure out a way to work with them on.
What if they have association?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot to this and moving forward.
I mean, I wonder, the other question is that didn't point, and I think this is when that Paul, whether we, the Board of Selectmen, should meet with the Budget Committee and present them with what we're looking at here and why. So, Dave, you're okay? Dave, you're okay?
Yes.
On to you, Paul.
With your permission, could I recommend maybe a structure? Because there's a lot of moving parts here. Get together with Tufton Borough, work with the Lake Wentworth Association. Those are activities, and I think those are good things to do. But for my feeble brain, the way I would process this, I'd put it into 3 buckets: assess, recommend, act. And under the assess bucket, whatever you got to put in there, whatever things need to be done, to figure out maybe where the causes and working with private owners, I don't know. Recommend is what are we going to do and how much is it going to cost, and act is the timeline that says we're going to work on something. So maybe that's my my prior life's background, but I kind of, that's the way I'd put it. And then all this other stuff we can fit inside of that. Yes, I think sitting down with the budget people, educating the public, I think all of that goes into this. But I think that, for people out there and for me personally, I want to know, can we do something? Can we do something? And I know you can't do it. Dave cautioned me yesterday, you can't just, jump into things. But assess, recommend, do something would be the model, and I'd ask you to fit everything else into it.
Well, and I think his first one is getting involved with the Lake Winnipesaukee Watershed Association and be part of that plan as part of the, in figuring out what needs to be done and where the areas are. That's
Tucked
what,
out under the assessment phase,
okay?
right?
So, and then, you know, then the other two is the capital reserve account. To me, is to have some money available, and Partridge and Forest is to do something. We've already seen success in that. You know, do we need to work with associations? Do we may need to expand that? I will go with you. Meeting with the budget committee, I think that education piece, not only the budget committee, I know that I got a lot out of reading all the articles that came my way about what is cyanobacteria and what people can do. So is there anything else that we want to add to that to give some kind of direction to the staff and where we want to go? Anybody else?
Be aware that the Cricket Hill Association does not have a homeowners group at all, and they have no communications among themselves, so they would need to be contacted individually. Bucky Melanson, I think, has, well, the town tax collector would have the names of all the owners.
Okay, we'll need to see if we can get some of that together. I want to thank you, Mr. Muir, for coming in to educate us. It was very informative for me to see exactly what you are having on your lake. I haven't seen that, and if you get a blossom some other time, invite me over. I'd like to really get to better understand what we are looking at. I do like the idea of different members in the community being able to identify what's going on. I'm going to close this. Any other comments before we move on to something else? Okay.